Here's the story. It involves a lawsuit in Vermont, but it takes a little bear with me as I get you to that point, because this goes back to a controversy that started in February. And what happened is that in Vermont, like in pretty much every state, the girls' basketball teams across the state have their tournament at the end of the year to decide which team is the state champions, right? And so at this state sanctioned playoffs, during the state sanctioned playoffs, there was a game that involved, I even have this to show you here. Um, I'm going to share this tab. Here's the bracket so we can all stare at the bracket. Look at this game here at the bottom. You have the 5th seed Long Trail High School versus 12th seed Mid Vermont Christian School. And that does not look like a basketball score, 1 to F, whatever that means. We'll get to that. But they set up the bracket. There's a whole bracket with this whole tournament, and there's nothing weird about that. Okay, so there's the high school basketball championships going on for girls. Well, Mid Vermont Christian was slated to play Long Trail in that game, and they realized that the other team, Long Trail, had a trans athlete on the girls' basketball team. And so Mid Vermont Christian School decided, we're not playing this game. We're just going to forfeit. That's why the game was 1 to F. They gave Long Trail 1 point by default. Mid Vermont Christian forfeited the game, so they lose. So that's what happened during the game. They forfeited because there was a trans athlete on the other team. And when that happened, that was a news story for obvious reasons. This is what a Vermont newspaper said at the time. Mid Vermont Christian School girls basketball, it's a long headline, refused to play Long Trail because of transgender player forfeits playoff game. They got all the buzzwords in there for the Google. But look at this line from Vicky Fogg, who is the head of the Mid Vermont Christian School. We withdrew from the tournament because we believe playing against an opponent with a biological male jeopardizes the fairness of the game and the safety of our players. Allowing biological males to participate in women's sports sets a bad precedent for the future of women's sports in general. Like, first of all, she's wrong. I mean, tell me how the game was going to be unfair. I have not told you a single thing about the trans athlete who's on the other team. Was she the biggest player on the team? I don't know. Was she even any good? I don't know. And how is any of that going to impact the safety of our players? Because again, what do you think is going to happen if there's a trans athlete on the other team? Do you think the trans basketball player is just committing offensive fouls left and right? Because that's not how basketball is supposed to work. And also, what's the difference? I mean, if you're assuming that this trans player on the other team is like big and stronger or something, what's the difference between that and like just a big, strong, like cisgender female on the other team? Because there are plenty of those in any female sports, and they're really big and strong, and they could beat the shit out of you in any game. So, like, I don't know how having a trans player on the other team is unfair in that sense. But I guess I've heard the concern before. But just to spout this off, because, you know, Richard Dawkins says this stuff too, like, research has shown there is no consistent evidence suggesting trans athletes have a competitive advantage. But more importantly, this is high school sports. This is like Division 4 girls basketball in Vermont. Literally 3 people are paying attention to this game. It's not professional. It's meant to be fun. Yeah, it's meant to be competitive. I say this as the coach of a high school team myself. I take competition seriously, but I'm not expecting you to take my competition seriously. Like, it's high school basketball. It's supposed to celebrate the journey, not just the results. You know what I mean? And by the way, for all the concern about a threat to women's sports, by forfeiting the game, Mid Vermont Christian School denied all the girls on both teams a chance to display their skills on the court, which I think is far more unjust to those athletes. And by the way, I will show you one thing. This is hardly the point, but going back to that bracket, check this out. Yeah, Mid Vermont Christian School forfeited. Long Trail automatically won the game. Look what happened in Long Trail's next game. They got blown out by another team. So for all this talk about Long Trail has a trans player on the team and that makes them like unstoppable forces on the court. No, dude, they lost in their next game by a lot. I know that doesn't matter. It didn't matter even if they won. I'm just saying it wasn't that big of a deal, was it? So all of that happened back in February, okay? And to their credit, the Vermont Principals Association, which oversees all the competition in the state, they, a couple weeks after this happened, they had to decide, what do we do about the Mid Vermont Christian School? Like they can't just forfeit a game because there's a trans player on the other team. And in case you're wondering, how did a private Christian school even, why were they even allowed to play? Well, this is not weird. A lot of states, I live in Illinois, this happens in Illinois too, because public schools usually have a nonprofit of some sort that oversees athletic competitions across the state and organizes them and seeds them and all that stuff. Christian schools might say, we want in on the competition, and the state can say, sure, we will allow you to participate in the competitive athletics, competitive activities. That's fine. You can participate, but you do have to abide by our rules in the process. So, for example, if your private school says we don't play on the Sabbath, and Sabbath's on a Saturday, and there are tournament games scheduled for Saturday, too bad for you. Like we gotta do our thing. Just because your religion says you can't do something, we can't make all these accommodations. So sometimes that's a controversy. But again, everyone knows the rules going into it. I can tell you as a coach myself, I know our playoff schedule for like the next 3-4 years down the line. It's already set in stone. So like it doesn't matter if I can't take the weekend off, the tournament's gonna go on with or without me. Anyway, when this all happened in Vermont, check out what the Vermont Principals Association said in response. Jay Nichols, the executive director of the Vermont Principals Association, said the organization's 15-member executive board was unanimous in its decision. What was its decision? I'll go to the headline. Vermont religious school that refused to play team with trans player banned from sporting events. The Vermont Principals Association said, okay, if you don't want to abide by our non-discrimination policies, which by the way is law in Vermont, then you don't get access to the competition. You can be bigots, but you'll have to do it over there. You can't do it over here because we are playing by the rules and everyone agrees to those rules. And again, back to this guy's quotation, they unanimously agreed to kick out the Christian school. If you don't want to follow VPA rules, that's fine, but then you're just not a VPA member. It's fairly simple. That's really all we're going to really say about it. That is fair, right? Like you don't have to, you could be bigots. No one's saying they can't be bigots. You just don't get access to the good competition. So at the time, the question was, what is Mid Vermont Christian School going to do about all this? They said they were going to appeal the decision because their concerns were not addressed. And now that brings us to what happened this week. Because after all this, the group called Alliance Defending Freedom, the right-wing Christian group Alliance Defending Freedom, they just announced a lawsuit against Vermont state officials. So this is from Alliance Defending Freedom. They filed a federal lawsuit on Tuesday against Vermont officials for denying the Christian school and its students from participating in the state's tuition program and sports league because of their religious beliefs. And this is the part, like, when the Vermont Principals Association kicked the school out of their athletic competitions, not only does that school not have access to the athletic competitions, they also don't get access to academic competitions that are organized by the state. And also the state said, well, guess what? We give you, I'm going to get to the other part of this in a second, but look at this. When the Christian school reluctantly forfeited, this is from ADF, the conservative group, when the Christian school reluctantly forfeited a girls' high school basketball game against a team that had a male athlete, there's the misgendering, playing for them, the VPA kicked Mid Vermont Christian out of the association. Now, despite 28 years of prior participation in the league, the school cannot compete in any VPA athletics, effectively blacklisting the school from all state-sponsored events in the state. including spring sports, for which schools are still creating schedules. The VPA is going so far as to exclude Mid-Vermont Christian and its students from participating in co-ed academic competitions like the Geography Bee, Science and Math Fair, and Debate and Forensics League, all because the school doesn't think trans people are real. So again, to which I say, yeah, like that's how it works. What are you mad about? You don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You can be bigots, but you don't get to be bigots and work with the state and expect the state to bend over backwards for you. That's what I don't get. Like, if they want to play with the public entity, they got to play by the rules. Or form a Christian bigot league with all the other private Christian schools in the state, and then all 4 of your teams can just round robin play against each other over and over and over, and I'm sure everyone will love it. Like, the Christian school chose this route. The state didn't do anything to them. The Christian school chose this. And the state was being very generous by giving them the ability to compete against these other teams in the first place. I want to bring up one other thing here, which is that in this lawsuit, there's one aspect of this lawsuit I found really interesting, and that is that the state offers tuition to schools. Let me back up for a second. There was a lawsuit last year in Maine, and I talked about this before, but the situation in Maine is that every student is obviously guaranteed a state-sponsored like public education. The problem in Maine is that it's so rural in so many parts of its states that there may not be a public school anywhere near you. And so, like, what's a kid supposed to do if they live in a farmhouse far away from everything? Or they just live in a rural community where there's no public school, like within an hour drive of where they live? Well, Maine had a program that said, we will pay for your tuition to go to a private school if that's actually the best option for you because there's no public school near you. Now, that led to a lawsuit a couple years ago that said, where a couple of Christian schools said, well, if the state is giving money to private schools for kids to go there, you can't say you're not going to give money to private Christian schools or private religious schools. We want access to that money too. And the Maine officials were like, we literally cannot give private religious schools any of this tuition money. So the private religious schools sued. That case went in front of the Supreme Court. It was called Carson v. Macon. And the Supreme Court, this right-wing Supreme Court said, yeah, we're going to side with the Christian schools. Basically, what the Supreme Court said was that if a state offers a benefit that is like to private schools at all, you can't exclude private schools that also happen to be religious. And so that was technically on the surface a victory for the Christian schools that now theoretically had access to the money. But this is the amazing thing that they did in Maine. The lawmakers in Maine said, okay, so now we have to give money to these private religious schools so they can indoctrinate kids. We're not okay with that. So here's what we'll do. We will say any school that wants this tuition money has to abide by non-discrimination laws. So you cannot discriminate against students on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. If you agree to that, then okay, you can have access to the money. So the 2 Christian schools that fought all the way to the Supreme Court to get access to the money, they looked at that and they said, you know what? We don't want this money anymore. We would rather put our bigotry over the cash. So they bowed out. I think there's literally one private Christian school in Maine that said, yeah, we're okay with the non-discrimination stuff and they get access to the money now. But the 2 that fought for it didn't get it. So in Vermont, they basically have the same thing going on. They have a lot of rural students who get tuition payments to go to private schools. But in Vermont, the same thing happened where they said, okay, well, I guess we got to give money to private religious schools now as well after Carson v. Macon came down. But there is a non-discrimination law on the books. And so Mid-Vermont Christian School said, well, we would rather discriminate. And so Vermont said, okay, well, then you don't get access to tuition money either. And so this lawsuit that they just filed, it also says you kicked us out of the tuition program. They're mad about that. Look at this particular part of the lawsuit. Number 3 is what I'm looking at. The state is entitled to its own views, but it is not entitled, nor is it constitutional, to force private religious schools across the state to follow that orthodoxy as a condition to participating in Vermont's tuitioning program and the state's athletic association. See Carson v. Macon. And it's like, that's the case I just told you about. I don't know why their interpretation of it suggests that the Supreme Court is on their side, because the Supreme Court said, well, you got to play by the rules. But if the rules give money to private schools, okay, religious schools can have access to it. But if the state says, okay, but then all the schools have to like not discriminate, then the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on that. That's still the rule. Like, if the Christian schools want to discriminate, they don't get to get the tuition. So I don't know what they're bringing up here, but they're big mad about the fact that they don't get access to tuition dollars either. Just going back to that quotation, so it makes a little more sense here. You could see what it says right at the top here. Now, despite 28 years of prior participation. Oh, sorry, that's not what I want. I'm going to go back up here. Yeah. They filed a federal lawsuit Tuesday against Vermont officials for denying the Christian school and its students from participating in the state's tuition program and sports league because of their religious beliefs. So, listen, I don't know how this case will go, obviously. Who knows what appellate courts will do? Who knows if this gets to the Supreme Court? But again, like, I don't know what the problem is. Vermont, as a state, the public officials in the state set ground rules. If anyone wants to participate in them, you have to abide by the basic rules, one of them being non-discrimination. If the Christian bigots say, no, discrimination is what our religion is, Jesus told us to hate like the trans kids, then they're allowed to have those beliefs, but they do not deserve to be rewarded for that. And I don't know how you get a lawsuit that says we just want to be mad about this sort of thing, because that seems ridiculous. I think they are going to lose. They should lose. It doesn't mean they will, because nothing matters anymore, right? Like, anything can happen now. There was one more line. This is the quotation I want to share with you. Let me pull this up. There we go. This is from the lawsuit as well. This is from an article I wrote about it. But the state has put plaintiffs to an impossible Hobson's choice, like damned if you do, damned if you don't. Number one, abandon their religious beliefs, character, and practices, and adopt and follow the state's gender identity rules so they can participate in school athletics and the town tuitioning program. Or two, adhere to their religious beliefs, character, and practices, miss out on middle school and high school sports, lose valuable tuition reimbursements, and inevitably lose students necessary to keep its doors open. Like, those are the two choices, which is accurate. Those are your choices. Play by the rules or don't. But if you don't, you're not going to get the money or access to competition. Like, why are you mad about that? If your private school, your private Christian school can't work because all these parents are like, wait, so your Christian school doesn't have good athletic competition, doesn't have access to good academic competition, but goes all in on the hate. Maybe I'm going to send my kid to another place. Like, that's just the business of having a private school. If you can't provide anything better, why should anyone go there? That's your fault. Like, I hope this lawsuit doesn't get anywhere. You never know. But I find that a very weird situation for them. I don't know why they're suing. I don't know what case they have. But again, Alliance Defending Freedom is a conservative group. They don't have the best lawyers. That's why they work for ADF. And their whole thing is, we're going to sue not necessarily because we think we'll win, because they have plenty of money. They don't care if they win or lose. It's because they're now going to fundraise off of the idea that we're defending a Christian school, so give us money, because we'll file all the lawsuits you want. It doesn't matter what the law says. So that's where we're at with this place.